How's it going, everybody? RazingHel here, and today I'm going to talk about my first 5 hours, basically, in the game 7 Days to Die. So I was looking through like the Steam Top 100 back in late December, I would say, of 2016, and I noticed this game called 7 Days to Die, and it piqued my interest because, well, it's a survival game, and one of the types of genres that I do like, besides the general strategy genre of games, is the survival genre, and it can be in various different formats. It could be Don't Starve, it could be 7 Days to Die, it could be that Project Zomboid game. All of them have very different presentation styles, I feel. So 7 Days to Die is actually a first-person game, and it has a lot in common with Minecraft, if you're familiar, as you probably should be, with that game. So 7 Days to Die has that same voxel, I guess they're calling it voxel. It's where you have big blocks, and you can basically dig up everything and build everything. The thing about it, like versus Minecraft, for example, is it's more based around, the graphics look less pixelated, and it's more focused on combat with zombies and actually hardcore survivalism, I guess you could say. So in the first 30 minutes, I would say, I was, because it's first person, I'm terrible at first person, I really got motion sick from it. And I probably put it down for about a week before picking it up again, because I was thinking, I only have 30 minutes in, I could still get a refund for it. I wasn't sure if it would be my cup of tea, and I'm still not saying it is my cup of tea, but I've started to learn more about it, and I think that has sort of shaped my opinion a little bit more positively on the game. So after those first 30 minutes, when I felt puking sick, I came back to it, played another 30 minutes probably, so it was just under an hour. And in addition to the field of view just absolutely sucking for me, and before you say anything, I'm still not done with the story, so there's more to this. But besides the field of view sucking, in my opinion, for somebody who has like extreme sensitivity to motion sickness, in addition to this, I kept being put into starting scenarios where there were critical materials missing. So if you're familiar with 7 Days to Die, you're basically, and I played the campaign version of it, it's the handcrafted map, but if you're familiar with 7 Days to Die, you basically spawn like in the middle of a road somewhere next to a prefabbed house and a car. And since 7 Days to Die has various different biomes, it could be a snow biome, it could be a forest biome, it could be a desert biome. Those are the common ones that I remember. But I kept those first 60 minutes or so, when I would spawn into a biome, it would be a biome that didn't have, I believe it was, small stones. And at the time, I didn't know you could just punch a big rock to get stones out of that, albeit less efficiently. So I was running around with, my basically looking at the ground. So you got all this motion just blurring past you all the time. Man, it made me so puking sick that I couldn't take it for more than 30 minutes. And, that could... I know the game is still an alpha, but that's sort of a failing of the game, I think, if they ask you to pick up stuff like stones and then there aren't any stones really in the general vicinity. So after that, I would say, I kind of wanted to get into it because it sort of intrigued me. There was a very visceral feeling of vulnerability, I guess, because when you'd run up against zombies, it was genuinely scary in Alpha 15. Now, I've seen some videos that were done about Alpha 12, I think it was, and whoever the person was who did them, they were an absolute genius at headshotting every single zombie. So while they were pointing the bow, and like one time, like and they dropped 5 zombies in the space of 5-6 seconds, here I am taking 2 minutes to shoot down a single zombie, and I'm hitting them in the head as far as I'm aware. I'm doing my utmost to hit them in the head. Maybe I'm just not aware of how the headshots in the game work, and it really made me feel like the game was really hard. Like every single zombie was a matter of life and death compared to these other people that I was seeing playing it. And I just didn't really understand why it was so difficult for me. But at the same time, I was also driven by that same sense of just being overwhelmed, where you're incredibly underpowered in a very dangerous situation or world that's pretty much out to get you. And I also like the idea of building bases and stuff like that. Like I'm somebody who enjoyed the building aspect to games like Stronghold, which I sort of got into this whole thing playing more so than the actual combat. And that's quite a divergence, I think, from a lot of people who occupy the strategy space. Like I see a lot of them, they actually enjoy the battles, and that's not something that appealed to me as much. I probably am more more suited towards the simulation side of, or the simulation genre in gaming than I am strategy. But for some reason I picked up strategy, and I just basically like the base building aspects to it, and especially in games that allow you to really tailor, make, and customize your base. And so that also appeals to me in 7 Days to Die, or 7D 2D, I guess they call it. The bigger fans of it. So then I probably hadn't played the game, after that point, because I tried to get started. It really didn't work. Like my very first night, I'd get killed, even inside a house. Like I'd lock myself inside a prefab. I remember I was waiting outside on the porch outside of one of these prefabs. It had like a deck, a little second floor deck to it. And I was hiding out there, and I was spotted, but the zombies couldn't get to me. But then I started running out of food and stuff like that. And I knew that basically I wasn't going to survive very long. So I just quit out of it. Then more recently, I came back to the game again. And this was after being inspired by some streamers on Twitch to actually play it, because, they're always so good at it. And I'm not. So I'm thinking, how difficult can this really be? So I went back into the game again, and this time I looked at the options. Oh, look, you can actually increase the field of view quite significantly. So I did that, and my, what a difference that did make. All of a sudden I was able to play for longer than 30 minutes at a time. Like I think I was able to go about an hour and a half before I had to put it down, because I was, I was feeling motion sick again. And I really started to learn more about like the basic build cues of the early game. So that's one thing you have to understand about a lot of games, is that be good at them. You're basically remembering build cues, especially when it comes to like strategy. So if you want to be good at something like StarCraft, for example, there are certain build cues that are associated with, making a strong start. I'm not personally familiar with StarCraft, but that's a good example of a strategy game that's fairly popular. So for example, Don't Starve. There is a certain order that you should ideally build things in, and there is a certain number of resources that you have to sort of keep in the back of your mind that need to be gathered before you start doing that building. So let's say you actually want to craft a science machine, a backpack, shovel, stuff like that, just very basic beginner level stuff. Well, there are resources that you need to gather to be able to do that. And if you know the number of resources, it makes things so much easier, because you don't waste any time gathering unnecessary or extra resources. You can actually get into it. And so I started learning a little bit more about that in 7 Days to Die, and I actually managed to survive a couple of times through the night. So the first time, it was actually on the roof of a house. So this was a little bit better than sitting out on the porch, because I had a campfire down, I had the bedroll down. I was actually crafting a ton of stuff. In addition to just destroying the roof of the house entirely, I was like leveling it right off. So it was a lot more interesting than sitting still on the porch of a second story floor on the outside of the house. And, it was fairly okay. I've probably fell off of the roof 2-3 times. It almost seems like it's impossible to avoid spraining your ankle at some point in this game. Like, I just fall off of so much stuff in 7 Days to Die, because it seems like you might be standing on a ledge that's secure, but the minute you turn around, it's almost like it pushes you off and then you fall down. So a whole bunch of times I fell in the time I've spent playing 7 Days to Die, and you end up getting that sprained ankle and stuff like that, which I think impairs your movement. I don't know. Maybe it was just my lack of food, because, once you spend an entire night on top of the building, or as I did on top of the prefab house, I ended up being pretty hungry and pretty thirsty. So I needed to find, I reached the point in the tutorial where they tell you to actually go and find the trader's post. So I got off the roof of the house and I start running towards the trader's post. Obviously, I didn't do this the optimal way, because I wasn't picking up resources along the way as I should have been. I just pretty much made a straight dash for it. And that is one thing I've found that I really don't appreciate about 7 Days to Die, is how big the world is. I think in a lot of ways, the game should have smaller worlds. I don't know if that's customizable or not, but I really don't like this that's one thing I don't like about sandboxes, is in a lot of cases, the games that have sandboxes in them fill them with nothing interesting. So it's basically functioning as a barrier to progress. So in other words, hey, I want to go and do something fun. Guess what you're going to have to do? You're going to have to grind by running for 5 minutes straight, just flat out running, before you reach the interesting thing that you really wanted to do. And that's personally like one of my biggest gripes about sort of open world games in general is a lot of them do this, especially a lot of indie games do this. Like in games like The Elder Scrolls Skyrim, I suppose, you could make the case that there are enough interesting side quests and stuff to make actually exploring interesting. You're going to be finding unique stuff, but I don't find that to be the case in many indie developed games. Like one other game that's sort of similar to 7 Days to Die, although it's not in the same way, that I played last year was Gloria Victis, and I probably made about 3 videos on it because I was really disappointed in what it had to offer. It had these big freaking cities that were almost entirely empty, so it could take you 5 minutes to traverse the entire city and just to move from like one vendor to another. So let's say there was a vendor that sold armor and then a vendor that sold clothing or something like that, and or like, stop doing that, or food, better not do it again, or food. And so to get from one crafting station to another, you have to walk this huge city that had nothing in it, and that takes, I'm probably exaggerating by saying 5 minutes, but it took at least 2 minutes, and it was just really dull. You know, what is the advantage to making the player walk all this distance with nothing to do? And I sort of feel that's somewhat the case in 7 Days to Die. Now, I know I've seen that in the later parts of the game, you can actually get vehicles or at least make motorbikes. So that would go a long way towards alleviating some of this problem where you're basically just running for half a day to get to a place you want to loot. But in my opinion, that was something that I really did not care for in the game, and I still don't. So when I was running to get to the trader's hut for the first time, it was like, this was the first time I actually got far enough in the game. I got to the point where I'd completed all those quests, and the next quest was actually to find the trader's post. And I came across a river, and you know, I was thirsty, so I filled my glass jar, and then I accidentally drank from the glass jar because I wasn't aware I had filled it yet. So I basically, I was right clicking on the water. I said, does this really, am I actually getting water? And I guess I had. I'd filled my glass jar that I'd previously drank the clean water out of with dirty river water, and after that I just drank it because it was in my inventory and I had it selected, obviously, because I just finished filling it, and I drank it. So then I got dysentery or something like that, and that is, I guess, another way you could look. You know, I tried to look at the menu, like my character profile, says, "Oh, you have dysentery. What exactly does that do to me?" It wouldn't say. Like, there's no tooltip that pops up and says, "Oh, this causes your health to decrease or your hunger to decrease fast," or anything like that. They simply told you how long it was going to last if you didn't cure it. So, you know, that's one of those things where there is a critical lack of important information for the player to actually make decisions. Like, what's the point in it's an interesting decision. Like, I can sort of understand some games doing it. Some games do that intentionally because it's supposed to be part of the adventure for you to discover these things yourself. But at the same time, in a lot of cases, this just basically means you have to play the entire game with a wiki open next to you for the game. Like, if you don't want to unnecessarily waste potentially hundreds of hours by playing the game and then learning the stuff through trial and error, you end up having to have a wiki open to you 100% of the time. You know, Don't Starve does this, and I guess, you know, Don't Starve and 7 Days to Die do this, and they've enjoyed some certain amount of success by any measure, but it's not something that I personally am attracted to. But you know, on the upside to this, the one positive thing I've noticed is it makes, if you have games that obfuscate information, critical, oftentimes important, very important information about the game, it makes people look to external sources for information about that game. So if you're somebody who is looking to sort of start doing content on a game that people actually want to watch, like if it's going to be informative, one of the best games to choose for that kind of stuff are games where they obfuscate a lot of information that should be sort of publicized. So in that way, it's good because you have an audience that is actively, or you have a potential audience that is actively searching for content related to, you know, educational content related to that game. So if you're looking at it from that perspective, it's a positive thing. But if you're looking at it from the perspective as somebody who just wants to play the game, I find the obfuscation part annoying. Not nearly as much as the huge biomes with nothing in them that you have to run through, but it's similar. So one of the things that really strikes me about 7 Days to Die and its biomes, they are huge. Like, the world is huge for single player. I know the game has multiplayer in it, but I'm not playing multiplayer. I'm playing the campaign thing, the part of the game that has supposedly been handcrafted. It's designed for single player. And I don't know if it's the same size as the multiplayer worlds, but it is pretty damn big. And I feel like it's too big to the point where there's just too much emptiness in it. So there should be, I think, a smaller world size for those of us who don't want to have to spend the entire afternoon in the game running from point A to point B to actually do something interesting. I mean, because you think about it, what exactly do you have to do along the way? Like, you're running from point A to point B. You can hit grass, you can pick up feathers, you can pick up stones that are laying on the ground. You can fell some trees on the way. Obviously, you're going to run into zombies. You can either run away from them or you can kill them. It's pretty much your call. In the current alpha version of the game, though, with a low-level bow, I haven't had any success headshotting these zombies. Like, I guess that's the important thing to take away from this as well, is that I'm somebody who is completely new to the game. Like I said, I have 5 hours in it, in addition to occasionally watching a couple of out-of-date videos about the game on YouTube and watching somebody play it on Twitch. And the funny thing about Twitch, is unlike a lot of YouTube, I guess, and that's one of the reasons why I like YouTube, the person playing it usually doesn't talk about how the game is played. Like, it's sort of the platform to go to if you already know how the game is played and you know a lot of the intricacies of it, but you're looking for basically high-level strategy. So unlike YouTube, where somebody might actually go through the effort of explaining it all, on Twitch, you basically have people, just talking to chat all the time. And that is like one of the cultural differences between the two platforms that you have to keep in mind if you're actually debating which one to use. Overall, if you're looking to do, like, this is a complete tangent that's aside from 7 Days to Die, but in my experience, if you're looking to actually do playthroughs and basically raw gameplay like that, you probably should go to Twitch, because it's more likely you're going to get viewership than you will on YouTube, because YouTube requires people to actually be searching that specific thing, whereas on Twitch, they're more likely to just browse past the game and notice that somebody's playing it and take a look at, who is playing the game. And then you pop up and all of a sudden, yeah, somebody's going to watch that. Even if it's a game that's traditionally not played a lot or something like that, that's especially a good opportunity for you to get discovered. So what is really the takeaway from 7 Days to Die after playing it for 5 hours? I still feel like it's pretty challenging. I know there are ways to cheese the game. Like, I've read this Steam guide where you basically just dig a tunnel underground and you can basically never have to worry about zombies again, which, in some ways it ruins the game experience, but in other ways I like knowing about it. Like, I'm somebody who is actually in favor of creative mode or console commands. Like, I've used them to pretty good effect in Don't Starve, because in general it just saves time and you have a limited amount of time. So if you want to get a lot of things done, you got to look at how to sort of optimize your style, your schedule, so that you save time. You do things as efficiently as possible, right? So I look at like 7 Days to Die and I say, should I go ahead and just dig a tunnel at night so that way I don't have to worry about building some sort of fortress against the zombies? And I don't know. I've heard that they're going to get rid of that cheese, so the game is still in alpha. But I'm by far more intrigued by it now than I have been at any time in the past, and I'm by far more compelled to play it. However, it's not the type of game that you can play while learning, I don't think, and then put it on YouTube. So most likely, I'm not going to bother playing it on the channel. And I also think it really doesn't fit in with a lot of what I do. A lot of what I do is focused on strategy. And although there is the element of survival when it comes to Don't Starve, a lot of the games, pretty much every single game I've played, has been a very detached third-person game, or even more so. Like, we're talking about like God mode, where you don't directly control one character. Like, that's the interesting thing about Don't Starve, is would you really describe that as a third-person game? It's more like an RPG. Like, if you think about games like World of Warcraft, I've never played WoW. Fate would be another good example. That was a game that's similar to WoW, but it doesn't have the multiplayer aspect to it, and it's just really crap. But it sort of has that same thing where you're just controlling one person, but but it's not what you'd commonly associate with third-person perspective. Like when I think of third-person perspective, I think about Fallout New Vegas or something like that. We're talking about a very detached third-person perspective, almost like what would you consider almost to be a god mode view, sort of like you're looking down on this little character that you control, but it's quite detached from the character. And then you have games where you don't control any single character, but you control a village of characters and stuff like that. And then it's more like strategy and simulation, and that's the type that I'm more or less familiar with, and probably one of the genres that I've really enjoyed for the last 10 years or so, especially on the PC. Like, I was not really introduced to first-person games on the PC until 2012, maybe 2013. I'm trying to think of the first one. It was quite a while. It was some sort of Doom clone or something like that. It was like it's an open source Doom clone or something like that. I forget what it was called, but that was probably one of the first first-person games that I ever played on the PC, and that was, like I said, it was in 2013. It was in 2012. I'm pretty sure it was in 2012. It was a small install, and that was the important thing. It was like 40 megabytes to download the entire game. And see, this was important at the time because all I had was dial-up, and as you know, in 2013, 2012, dial-up in 2012 is really slow. Like, this is a complete tangent aside from what I usually talk about. I mean, like, the entire topic of this video is 7 Days to Die. But when you have a dial-up connection in 2013, you end up disabling stuff in your browser like JavaScript and images, because basically, I mean, even this downloading the CSS file can take a lot of time. You're probably better off just using a browser like Lynx and looking at it in a command prompt or a command line sort of interface, rather than actually trying or waiting all that time to download these JavaScript files and the CSS files. That was one thing that I found rather interesting about it is, they talk about turning off the images in your browser is supposed to significantly speed up the loading of it. And it was actually turning off JavaScript that did a lot. I cut the loading times in half almost just by disabling JavaScript. And, some websites are not going to function without JavaScript, but by and large, it made the web browsing experience a lot more convenient than it was when I had JavaScript enabled. Because then you think about it, JavaScript doesn't do a whole lot of useful stuff unless you actually need to interact with the site. So if you're only on the site for information purposes, if you're passively consuming the site, there's really no reason to have JavaScript enabled in a lot of circumstances. So that was one of the first-person games that I ever played on PC, was some sort of Doom, or what's the other game? One of those really old pseudo 3D that were actually 2D first-person shooters that sort of pioneered it. But this was an open source clone of that, and I really hadn't played many first-person games in the PC besides that. So when I started to play more first-person games on the PC, you have to understand, I hadn't really done that for pretty much my entire time growing up. There was the occasional time playing it on PS3, for example, because my family had a PS3, but not on the computer. I'm not exactly sure how much of a difference it makes, but it's like sitting a certain distance from the screen, I don't get as motion sick from it as I do when I'm playing it on TV. So TV, you're sitting a significant distance away from it seems like, and I generally can handle that for longer periods of time than I could when sitting next to a 23.7-inch monitor, because that's the size of my monitor, is like 23.7 inches. And yeah, I still have that problem. It's like even after an hour and a half, I usually have to quit because I start feeling really motion sick. And that's why I have this little fan here next to me. So even in the dead of winter, when you're feeling dizzy, you really start to get hot. And for some reason, just cooling off generally sort of assuages that feeling of motion sickness, it seems like. It helps me anyway, and I guess that's the important point. I'm pretty much run out of things to say about this 7 Days to Die at this point, I think. The farthest I've ever gotten is actually the Trader's Post. So that was on towards the end of day 2. That is the furthest I've ever gotten in 7 Days to Die. So I have a long ways to go, I think, but it could be an interesting journey. It would be interesting to see if I can actually headshot any of the zombies once I have better equipment, because it's one of the things that I sort of found out was that when you have really low level equipment, apparently it does very little damage, or it's very inefficient. If you're mining stones with a level 1 axe, you should probably just scrap it when it's dead or when it's used up, because at that point you're going to be crafting something that's higher level guaranteed, and that's going to make you more efficient at what you're doing. So I decided to do this sort of format just as an explanation because I've been trying some different things and I decided to do more or less the post commentary format rather than doing the live reaction to it, because I think I can actually better formulate my thoughts and reactions to the game. And a lot of times you actually don't have to pay minute attention to every detail of the game when you're first learning it, so to speak. Like if you are high level, if you're an experienced player and you can give sort of a high level analysis of a gameplay, then paying attention to a lot of the small actions that are going around in the background, what's going on the screen, could actually be useful. But the thing I found about like commentating over live gameplay, like when I'm actually playing it, is that by and large the commentary is quite not uninsightful. It's not very insightful. Like I'm not somebody who reacts funny to things. Like if you're a comedian, you can get away with that. But I'm not a comedian, so yeah, you have to think about what's the value you do bring to what you're doing. And I think I can actually deliver better value doing it in post. I have my ideas better fleshed out. I can actually list them down. What are my thoughts on 7 Days to Die so far? That is another thing that I think is underappreciated, is the perspective of a newcomer. Like I've noticed there are a lot of elitist communities that don't want to hear you. If you're a newcomer, you should shut the hell up and sit back and learn. And they don't want to hear what your perspective is on the game, even though your perspective as a new player can actually help the other players, the more advanced players, tutor, let's say, new players, as well as the game developers improve the game for beginning players. So to ease that learning curve, or at least give them the resources required so that they don't feel demotivated from actually learning the systems of the game. So a lot of elitist people involved in like some very, very hardcore fan clubs of the game. And that was one thing that I never felt really compelled to do, because I think I understand Stronghold Kingdoms at a fairly high level. And when new players would come into the game and stuff like that, I never actually felt compelled to act condescending towards them. Maybe it's just my perspective because I was the one who was doing it, but a lot of people who are high level do that. They really look down on the new players. I guess it's sort of like a hazing ritual, and that was something that I've never really understood, especially as a moderator, because I was basically one of the tenets of what qualifies you to be a moderator is you're somebody who is looking to help new players understand the game. I was a moderator for Stronghold Kingdoms, for those of you who don't follow me for Stronghold Kingdoms. And that was like one of the things I found disappointing about certain communities that I've encountered since moving on a bit, broadening my horizons a bit from Stronghold Kingdoms, is that I found there can be some really good players at the top, but there can also be some really toxic ones. And, depending upon what the ratio is and how outspoken the good ones are, so to speak, they can really ruin the newbie's experience moving up. It's like very, very, very harsh. And some people will actually like that very competitive sort of environment that sort of challenges you to really succeed, that they throw obstacles in your way constantly and they tell you you're terrible and get good, that sort of environment. That is not something that I appreciate or encourage, or something that I do. So that's an entirely different culture. I'm not saying it's a culture that shouldn't exist, but it's a foreign culture to me and my methodology, basically. So yeah, 7 Days to Die. I've played it for 5 hours now, survived to the second day, which really isn't much of a challenge. Like if you can't survive to the second day, maybe you should take that as a hint that you're not good enough to actually play the game. Like I've thought about this. Like it took me 5 hours just to survive to the second day. Wow, I am terrible at this game. So this has gone on by far long enough. That's 7 Days to Die, like I've said before. 7D, 2D. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think of the format, if is it any good, and I hope to see you next time.